thought I'd put that in before we go online.
Okay. Yeah, Ellen and Bill and I were on a committee together, although it wasn't very interactive.
Thought I'd put that in before we go online.
Okay, now I think we are live. Okay, now I can introduce you. Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going to talk about no first use again. And if you're tired of the subject, it's important for you to know about these things and for me to learn about it too, because it's really a hot topic at the moment. We're getting ready for the Non-Proliferation Review Conference, and this no first use issue is coming to the fore very much nowadays, both because President Biden had originally promised or indicated that he was in favor of having the US adopt a policy of never using nuclear weapons first again. The again has to be in parentheses. But I don't know whether he's going to stick to that now that he's in office. And that's part of the discussion. The other thing is whether or not we can trust many countries that say they are in favor of no first use, and that would include China. So we're going to talk about China's role in this whole thing, and we're going to have further discussion about all the implications of having a policy of no first use, especially if it were adopted by all the nuclear weapons countries. So I have three very prominent and great people here to talk with me today. They're scattered around the world, two of them, one in Winnipeg, one in British Columbia, and one in Manila in the Philippines. I'll start with Manila first. Aaron Tovish is a former, he's a longtime, in fact, a career peace activist. There are not many people who actually made a living throughout their entire career organizing peace groups and anti-nuclear weapons organizations, but Aaron has done that. I first knew him when he ran something called the Parliamentarians for Global Action near the UN, but he's gone on to higher things. And now is living in the Swedish embassy or near the Swedish embassy in Manila, because his wife is the ambassador to the Philippines, a brand new appointment. So this is the first time I guess I've talked to Aaron since he's moved to Manila. Hello, Aaron, how are you?
Doing okay. It's after midnight here.
Yeah.
I usually sound asleep at this point, but it's a pleasure to be with all of you and whoever is listening in as we stream.
Okay.
I also worked for 14 years with Mayors for Peace, and this work.
Right. I should give the whole CV, but I don't. I just gloss over some of these details, like, 15 years of a person's life. Ellen Judd is a retired anthropology professor, University of Manitoba, and she's in Winnipeg and is a new member of the Canadian Pugwash Group, or new member of the steering committee of the Pugwash Group. Hi, Ellen. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Nice to talk to you.
Good. All right. And near Victoria, in a place called Souk or something, British Columbia, is William Geimer. He's a retired professor of law from, is it William and Lee University?
Washington.
Yeah, that doesn't sound right.
No, it's Washington and Lee. It's Georgia.
Washington. Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. I didn't write it down, but at any rate, he's retired law professor, but that's in Virginia, and he's now living in British Columbia. So it's good to have all three of you folks here. Now, today is one of the weekly days when we do not have an agenda. And it's I call them schmooze days. But in this case, we don't have an agenda, but I'm pretty able to guess what at least one of the topics will be. That is, you guys are free to talk about whatever's on your mind. And maybe what I should do, since I think that in a way Bill is going to be the odd man out, is give you the first crack to express your particular interests, because when we move on, I have already ascertained that both Ellen and Aaron are interested in talking about the no first use of nuclear weapons policy. And if you have other things on your mind, you have the prerogative to express them today, Bill. So why don't I let you say what's on your mind first before we go on to what I expect will consume most of our attention.
Thank you, man. By way of background, I did want to mention that I've been here since 2000 and been a Canadian citizen since 2005. I'm a military veteran, and my main concern in peace work is civilian casualties of war. I wrote a book entitled Canada, the Case for Staying Out of Other People's Wars, and I'll be happy to get a copy to you if you wish. I have suspended since last December all of my major peace work, including being chapter coordinator for World Beyond War in Victoria, so that I could work on establishing the Greater Victoria Peace School. I have a board of 8 terrific people. It is going to be an actual on-the-ground, in-person, cooperative learning venture with an approach to peace education that is unique. And of the number of features about the Greater Victoria Peace School is close to my heart. It is a joint undertaking between faith communities and peace groups here in the area. And the website is under construction. The curriculum is almost finished. We've raised a little money. And if you want to know more about the Greater Victoria Peace School, please contact me. Just email me. I have 2 accounts. The one that deals with the Greater Victoria Peace School usually is Peace Vet Canada at Google.
I'll put
at Gmail.
email. Okay. I'll put that under your picture. Okay.
I appreciate that. So the other matter that that is of interest to me, and it's again something that I will simply ask that if you have a further interest in this matter, that you email me, because I know we don't have time today to go into all of the evidence that I've collected over the last few days on this subject. I'm concerned, I've long been concerned about the relationship of my beloved adopted country with the US, where I spent the first decades of my life. And I think that relationship needs to be examined and considered and discussed. It is, to me, becoming more and more painfully obvious that the United States is descending into fascism. And so I did some research with specific comparisons between the Italian government and society between 1921 and 1943, and the US situation from at least 2016, but before sometime, to the present. And the list of similarities is long and it is disturbing. So I try not to pay all that much attention every single day or moment, as some people do, to what's going on to our south. But my concern for Canada makes me pay a good bit of attention to it. And if you would like to have more about that comparison, I simply took the definition of fascism and its elements and compared current reality of the US with reality in Italy at a comparable time. So Any part of that that you want to discuss today, I'm happy to do. But I do want to raise the matter that it is past time to begin to concentrate on Canada's relationship with a country that is in real trouble.
I would certainly agree that the U.S. is in real trouble as a citizen of the U.S. too, and along with you. Okay, thanks, Bill. We may come back to that, and if anybody wants to join on that issue right now, go ahead. Otherwise, I know what we're going to talk about next. Either one of you folks want to add anything on that topic?
Yeah,
Okay.
if I may. I worked with with Mayors for Peace for 14 years. And we had a slogan that cities are not targets. And of course, we meant nuclear weapons. Mayors for Peace is headquartered in Hiroshima, Japan. But we also meant a target of conventional bombardment as well. And I think in that organization, there's a potential to take a very positive and significant role in the question of civilian casualties of war. I think also the United Cities and Local Governments, which is the broader organization of all city issues globally, could be playing a role in that regard as well. And I think the approach being taken by, is it Article 36, or I forget the name of the organization, they're working on the use of explosive force in populated areas. And
that article is something as a title of the organization. I don't know about it.
Yeah, it's based on one of the articles of which one of the Geneva Protocols, I think. We can pin that down quickly. It'd be easy to Google and find out the exact sort. But I think that approach of trying to get clarity on what kind of use of explosive force is allowable in areas where there could be collateral damage is a very smart legal approach. And it could use the political force of cities behind it.
Well, that
so that's
certainly would
something we
cause
could talk about at another time.
That would cause, it would be a great idea to talk about that, because it would really require a total rethinking of World War II, where it's, if I remember correctly, it was cities seemed to be the main target. I remember, reading the newspapers when I was, 12 years old or 10. And every night it was a new German city. And then, of course, there were the cities in Japan that were all targets every night.
Yeah. Well, the Germans did their share as well. They firebombed Stalingrad before the battle even started. The city was consumed in a firestorm.
That's true.
So,
of course, there's St. Petersburg, which wasn't explosives, but it certainly wiped out most of the population, I gather.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Bill, because it's something that we should have a whole talk show about. So if you help organize it and tell me whom to contact, we can do that one of these times. Anyway, let's move on, since I know that both Ellen and Aaron have things to say about no first use. What occurred to me, Ellen, as I was reading some of the emails flitting across my screen, and the last few days, I know you've been engaged in a conversation, only part of which I've read, having to do with China's position of no first use. And maybe if you'll start off telling us about the Chinese statement of their declaration of no first use, then I think Aaron will fill in some background on the larger issue.
Okay, there was a little bit of discussion in the Canadian Pugwash group about this. And I looked at some of the documents. I work in the China field, so it's something that I keep an eye on all the time. And there was a very strong statement made at the UN in September by the Minister for Disarmament, John June, that was quoted, and then there was some question about what the source was. But it was a statement that was made in September at the UN that was uncompromising. And when Xi Jinping spoke shortly later, as the heads of state were speaking, he made a briefer mention of it, but he did indicate that China was proposing and had plans with respect to no first use. So I think that while everything may in some sense be in flux as we're in an era of escalating rhetoric, I think that we can look upon China as being fairly firm on no first use, not only because of the rhetoric, but also because it really makes absolutely no sense for China to move from the no first use position, because it would just be, it would be utterly self-destructive for it to propose anything else when its chief problems are with the United States and the Soviet Union that have overwhelmingly superior nuclear power. So I can't envision a situation in which China would think that the first use of nuclear weapons was going to be a responsible thing to do. So I think that China's not really a problem there, although there did seem to be some question about whether texts lined up. But I think that we don't really need to worry a great deal about that.
You say that there was an uncompromising position taken where the UN or something. What has led people to wonder whether China is serious or maybe backtracking and maybe on the way to abandoning that declaration?
I'm not certain where those questions did come from. My expectation, I think, is that China was wanting to position itself as having a very strong position on this and taking a leadership role. I think that would lead into the strength of the position, and that it's wanting to support no first use.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, it's maybe somebody just imagined it. I tell you what often happens is people who are generally skeptical of no first use policies, such as, for example, we had a conversation with Tariq Ralph, who by no means would say that he's opposed to a no first use policy, nevertheless said that he's skeptical about whether it means anything, that, he thinks that declaring it is simply just words, that when the real occasion comes, when there might be a temptation to use a nuclear weapon, that all of this declaration is worth nothing, that unless you actually have some, surveillance and real disarmament and that sort of thing, some real measures of change indicating a change in the posture, then it's not worth anything. So maybe that's the source of the anxiety that maybe China. Oh, but there's another reason, and that is that China is increasing their nuclear capacity. Now, it would have been interesting to include in this conversation Matthew Korba, who is the fellow living here in Toronto now, a young man who works for the Federation of American Scientists. And Matthew was the one who found what he claims are 250 or more, I've forgotten how many, silos now being built in Xinjiang, China province. And these are clearly for, as he's described it, for ICBMs. And after he made his discovery, a couple of weeks later, there was another discovery in another province or some distance away of another couple of hundred sites that are being developed. So if there is some evidence that the Chinese are actually trying to ramp up their nuclear arsenal, then that would give reason to wonder whether or not they really are serious about no first use. On the other hand, when I spoke to Tariq Ralph about this, I mentioned, I didn't have to mention the recent discovery of these sites. And he said he's not so sure that that's what they really are. And his reasoning was that when you dig a hole in the ground, you've got dirt. And the question is, where have you put that dirt? And he doesn't see, there's no dirt piled up around there. So he thinks that, maybe they aren't really holes in the ground or something. Maybe they're putting in wind turbines or God knows what. So of course the Chinese have not enlightened us on what they plan to do with those sites. And I guess it's open for anybody who wants to speculate about it. But it could be that discovery is part of the reason that people are wondering whether the Chinese are really serious about no first use.
I think that's very, very largely sort of the Cold War in words that we're afflicted with in these days. I think that the situation in terms of the expansion and modernization of nuclear weapons right now is being primarily led by the United States and the Soviet Union, or Russia, that are modernizing at such a rapid rate. And that China's stance is basically that it wants to have what amounts to a deterrent so that it isn't going to be attacked. And while one would prefer that nobody was engaged in any of this nuclear weapon development and modernization, I think that China is in fact just lagging behind and trying to maintain and to modernize it to ensure that it does in fact have a deterrent so that it's not vulnerable to either of the major nuclear powers, and particularly in the context of the current Cold War. So it is simply trying to, if it doesn't modernize, it will no longer have an effective deterrent, and it's feeling very pressured by the United States. And so I think that the weight of our concern about nuclear modernization should rest on looking at the United States and Russia in this respect. And only in that sense can other nations so easily follow behind. But it is like.
Excuse me, Meta, I'm so sorry about my interruptions. I've been having troubles with the computer. The computer just told me it's going to turn off in a minute. I will be back, but when I come back, if I could have a chance to talk immediately to take advantage of the time that I'm connected, I would appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Please continue.
Okay. Yeah, Ellen, it may be that you're ready for Aaron to reply anyway. Is that close to true?
If he's available now, by all means.
Aaron, come right in. Use what time is available right now. Aaron.
The screen looks frozen.
Oh dear. Okay. All right. Well,
I wonder if I might return for a moment to some of Bill's earlier comments while we're waiting for Aaron to return.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Could you move a little closer to the mic, Ellen? You're sounding muddy.
Okay, I'll just take if you could hold on for just a second, I'll take I'll turn up my microphone. Hold on.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, now here comes Aaron. So he does want his time at the mic when he comes in. Okay, let's see here. Aaron, are you with us?
I am again.
Okay, come speak.
For live streaming, this is a disaster, but I hope you can edit this.
Oh, I will. It's going to
make
take
everything
some
look perfectly
clear
smooth.
editing. Yeah, but I can edit it, so don't worry.
Let me say a few words about China.
Yeah.
Western experts have been predicting practically every other year that China will abandon its no first use policy. And every other year, China reaffirms its policy and the conversation dies down for a while. And then they're back again saying, oh, China's going to get rid of its no first use policy. China just reiterated in the United Nations on the 50th anniversary of them becoming the China member of the United Nations that they would not ever change their no first use policy. Now, let's make a clear distinction between the size of a country's nuclear force and its policy on first use. These are separate questions. We're asking the US, and we're hoping the US will adopt no first use policy. It has more silos, more nuclear weapons, blah, 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 by far than China. And yet.
Uh-oh. Well.
That's stupid.
Okay, we have to wait a minute while he comes back on. Because he's
I
not
just
even,
connect a thought before he comes back on.
yeah.
I was interested. I'm glad you explained the previous speaker saying that this was mere words, perhaps from everybody, and that just indicates that to me they may be right, and we're talking about whether it's mere words or not. In my view, this continues to be insanity, and the course of action is to focus on the nuclear nuclear weapons ban treaty, which is now international law, and begin to pressure and shame the nuclear countries into coming into full compliance. We're nibbling around the edges of something that is insane. And if we have efforts and resources, we should direct them towards pressuring the nuclear countries to come into compliance with international law.
Oh, okay. So forget about no first use.
Yeah,
The problem is, how is there any intermediate step that can be taken? Well, here comes Aaron again. Let him continue his line of thinking, and then we'll come back to yours. Okay, Aaron. Yeah. Okay, Aaron.
Again, apologies. The other point I want to make is that having silos and weapons in silos I agree, it's not as consistent with the other ways that weapons can be deployed in connection with no first use. Countries that have no first use policies generally deploy their weapons in a way which makes them as invulnerable as possible. A missile silo is not an invulnerable deployment. It's a sitting target. However, there is this sponge concept, which is that if you create enough sitting targets, the enemy has to devote lots and lots of missiles to taking out each one. And the US has lots and lots of missiles. And so China needs a way of absorbing those missiles without it having the same impact it would be if those missiles were all targeted on crucial facilities. And this is also where the shell game idea comes in, that you may have 300 missile silos, but you may only have, say, 100 or even fewer missiles. But if the enemy wants to be sure of getting all of them, they have to attack all 300 silos. So those are considerations regarding China. But regarding China and Taiwan, I think there's another situation. China was faced down, and Dan Ellsberg wrote recently in the New York Times about this, or his expose was covered in the New York Times, that China was faced down over the Taiwan Straits in the late 50s because the US was in a position to credibly threaten the first use of nuclear weapons against China. China did not have a response to that kind of a threat. And they backed down. And this was not over Taiwan itself, but actually just some islands controlled by Taiwan just off the coast of China. There's a whole string of little islands there that Taiwan continues to administer and has troops on. So, with many years having passed, and the issue of reunification of Taiwan is still up in the air, which is good, in my opinion. China does not want to be caught in a situation where if Taiwan goes and declares independence, applies for membership in the UN and other things, they don't want to be in a position where they have to accept that. And they want to have a credible threat that they would intervene if Taiwan does that. And they can't have that as long as they're in a position of being dominated by the US nuclear presence. So the buildup that's going on, both conventional and nuclear, is meant to give a signal to the United States that you do not have a carte blanche to use nuclear weapons against us. That would be a terrible mistake. So the situation is not good. This kind of competition is dangerous, and the whole pivot to Asia is exacerbating the situation there. The stuff over the islands, the little tiny reefs and so on, is really much ado about nothing, but it's being blown out of proportion. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about the situation there. But let's take a close look at what the situation really is, which is the United States has forward-based nuclear weapons in Guam. It has bases in several islands and areas around there. And, you know, where's the United States? It's on the other side of the Pacific. And here's China simply trying to assert its historical connection to various islands. Now, its legal claims are shaky in some places. And that people need to be clear on that. But the behavior is not a threat to world peace. As long as Taiwan doesn't make a break for it, there will not be a conflict. And I think what Biden said recently was corrected by his Secretary of Defense. And the position is really very simple, that no one should make any unilateral moves in that, have I been, yeah, here I am, should make any unilateral moves. The Chinese should not unilaterally try to impose themselves on Taiwan, and the Taiwanese should not unilaterally try to cut themselves off permanently from China. And the US will support Taiwan as long as it doesn't do that. And it will support Taiwan against an effort by China to impose on Taiwan, and vice versa. If Taiwan declares independence, it cannot count on US support. So as long as the status quo holds, things will be okay. But there are a lot of people, if you read the newspapers, there are a lot of people out there beating the drums for war. And this business of the airplanes entering what is often referred to as Taiwanese defense zone, well, that's incorrect. It is factually wrong. They have entered the Taiwan's air defense identification zone. What is an identification zone? It's a zone where a country would like airplanes that are flying in that area, but outside their territorial airspace, to identify themselves. The US got this whole thing about identification zones started, but the US doesn't comply with requests to identify unless it's flying its planes towards the country in question. If it's just flying through the identification zone in a tangential direction, the US tells its people, you don't have to identify yourself. If you look at the plots of the, what do they call them? The path of the airplanes that have been shown in the news, none of them are towards Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
So the Chinese are doing nothing unusual. Plus, the Taiwanese have only been putting out this information since December. But if you go back and look at the record, there were more such flights in January and nothing was made of it then.
Mm-hmm.
So this is being exacerbated by a media that, well, aside from being irresponsible, it simply just wants to make, I guess, sell more papers, because talking about war and fear and so on and so forth is better at promoting your product than actually giving a calm, sensible
Okay,
explanation.
let Ellen give her calm, sensible answer because she's eager.
Yes, I am. And I guess this didn't come through in the introduction, but I've been concerned with China for my entire adult life. I went there as a student in 1974 to 77. I've spent my entire career working on China and now following it from the point of view of peace and conflict right now. And one of the things that I wanted to particularly raise in this discussion is that a few days ago, Canada sailed a frigate through the Taiwan Strait in connection with an American similar sail-by. And this is something Canada hasn't done before. And it draws us into this escalating conflict that the United States is pushing primarily, although China's pushing back as well, around Taiwan. And one of the things that Biden had said is that he wanted to turn more towards multilateralism. But I don't think that many of us, when we heard that, thought that this was what he had in mind with multilateralism. So I think we need to be really concerned about the way in which China is getting drawn into the militarization of the tension between the United States and China. And there is, there's quite a lot that could be said about Taiwan, and I'm glad that Aaron brought some of this out and we could talk more about that. But I think that the big picture right now on Taiwan is not quite so much about the specifics of the Republic of China, the People's Republic, and everything that has happened since then. But what is really concerning is the global tension between the United States, determined to remain the world's sole superpower, and China's rise. And that this is largely to be seen as arising out of that underlying tension, which is just getting expressed in this militarized form. So that if we look to the pivot to Asia that the Obama-Biden administration announced in 2011, it was actually preceded a little bit, although under the radar, by a reconsideration of America's military posture from Afghanistan and Iraq to a more naval and air-based approach towards Asia, and in particular China. So that what we have had is, going back more than 10 years now, a tension as the United States saw China as a rising power, and a militarization of it from the beginning or even before the announcement of the pivot to Asia. And what we're seeing now is an intensification of this conflict. And I think that what we see in particular around Taiwan is that while the pivot to Asia and this new Cold War can manifest itself on many, many fronts, because it's a global issue and one that I think we need to be very concerned about, I think the point at which it is manifesting itself in a particularly militarized way at this moment is particularly apparent on the issue of Taiwan. And for a better understanding of that, I think that it's really good to keep in mind that move round about 2009, 2010 towards the militarization of the pivot to Asia. And some of the, with the idea at that time that there was a drawdown that was going to happen in Afghanistan and Iraq. And to think to what we've just heard President Biden saying in the withdrawal from Afghanistan, that one of the reasons for drawing down troops and sticking to that deadline was that there had to be a movement of the United States attention, including its military attention, to Asia. And one of the things that hasn't received quite enough attention is that in the last year, the United States has actually started stationing some troops in Taiwan. That was happened under Trump's administration, but it's continued, and it's not very many. It's some special forces and some Marine trainers, but it is a difference that is being made. And twice in recent weeks, Biden has made a statement about how far the United States was going to go in defending Taiwan, and then had to walk it back because it was an overstatement of US policy, because it's not promising to, doesn't want to quite promise to go to war, but it also wants to hint that it will. So we have this incredible tension that is being ramped up. And I think that the underlying problem here is this kind of militarization of what is fundamentally a contest for economic role and political power and influence in the global sphere. And it's really dangerous for it to become so militarized. We could have a long discussion about all the other facets of that. And, that connects with some of the things Bill was raising. But I think that immediately this militarization, I think, is a concern. And we should try to pull back from it and get Canada not to become a part of that as well. We should be very aware of the dangers that reside in this trend. And some of the discussion, Aaron's talking about some of the things that are in the press, and some of the things that pop up now and then. It came up in that longer Telegram article in the Atlantic in recent months, and it's been floated in some other cases, is that it might be a military defeat for China might be a really good thing for the United States in terms of the larger Cold War situation. There's, I think, a risk here of provocation in that a war between Taiwan and China would be devastating for both of them in such a way that one doesn't want to go to that place, and Taiwan and China certainly do not want to. So we don't want anybody else to be pushing global tensions in that particular direction. So I think there needs to be a very serious backing off here.
Okay, it looks to me like all three of you are agreed. First of all, Canada should distance itself from US policies. Second, the US is more to blame for the escalation of tensions than China is. But I'm confused about what, really is causing the escalation of tensions. Is China threatening? I got the impression, just casual reading of the press, that China has been acting as if they might actually intend to go to war against Taiwan. So please tell me where I got that misinterpretation, if that's what it is. Adam,
I think the United States is trying to tell us that.
Huh?
I think the United States is trying to tell us that. But
okay, Aaron, and then Bill. Quickly, Aaron.
Yeah. There's a newspaper in China called the Global Times, which is the editor takes a real hardline nationalist approach and jumps all over any indication or hint that Taiwan is moving towards independence or that the US is moving to give a unconditional support to Taiwan. And it writes in a very belligerent manner, and the Western press gobbles it up and repeats it and comes back with opinions mainly from the right, but also from the center and occasionally even from the left, saying that China is look at that, China's the worst thing in the world.
Mhm.
Go and look at the website of the People's Daily, which is the official Communist Party newspaper, and you wouldn't even know there was a crisis going on over Taiwan.
Mm. Okay.
I mean, seriously, I had to scroll through about 50 articles before I got to an article that said anything about Taiwan. And then 3 articles below that, there was a big piece on a badminton match between Taipei, Taiwan, and mainland China.
Okay.
So this is the level of disconnect that's going on, where some people get their rocks off or whatever, beating the drums of war and trying to ratchet up the tensions. And other people are trying to say, oh, come on, things aren't that bad. We'll work our way through this. Just calm down. But unfortunately, the louder voices are what we're mainly hearing. And I think it's incumbent on us and Chinese citizens and leaders to call these newspapers and politicians and activists to account for what they're doing, because if they keep it up, they might just get what they want, and they'll find out it isn't really what they want.
Thank you. Okay, Bill.
I want to thank Aaron Aaron and Ellen, but particularly for the underlying information from Aaron, which warns us about propaganda, which is I found an important factor throughout all of these situations. But I thought, since I'm roughly in the demographic of Meta, that maybe a little history would help the discussion a little bit. You see, I saw the debates between JFK and Nixon, and I think the islands they were talking about were Quemoy and Matsu. And so the politicians in the US were seeking political advantage in the midst of a blind anti-communist era that those who did not live through it, I think, cannot really appreciate. In historical terms, the U.S. Today, all these powers, the answer to this tension, to Meta's question, in my view, is that lately China, but the major powers of the United States and Russia and China are all vying for power and influence over other people's territory and resources. The US has had an advantage because it was the world's banker after World War I and after World War II, so there's a huge economic advantage. And this mass hysteria over communism was the Taiwan situation was certainly part of that. The US backed a loser. Chiang Kai-shek fled after losing an armed conflict to Taiwan. But we were and this was a year later, the US was making war on the people of Korea. And the propaganda there is a discussion for another time. I ended up at one point as a tank commander on the border of the free world, literally staring across at tank commanders in what was then East Germany, with the assumption that tactical nuclear weapons might be employed in that situation. So I hope you'll understand why I consider Aaron's comments and Ellen's as well, calling for a little common sense here through the propaganda to be very, very valuable. And I hope that they're, for those who are watching the program, that they are amplified.
Thanks so much. And Ellen,
I think all of that's very useful, and I think that the things people say are incredibly important, so that, you know, attending to the heightened propaganda is, I think, important because it's incredibly dangerous. But to return a little bit, I suppose, to things where words come closer to action, some of the other things that I think that is appearing in the discussions around China at present has been a great deal of concern, apparently, revolving around the Taiwan issue related to Biden's comments about the departure of the United States from Afghanistan for reasons of whether being there was in the interest of the United States, and it wasn't, so they were leaving, just as they unilaterally decided to go in. So basically, the discussion in the China field on this is about how this maybe makes Taiwan feel that it's at risk of being abandoned. So some of the rhetoric that has been going on in the recent statements from Biden have been about reassuring Taiwan. So there is all of this question really revolving around American decisions about how it's going to posture itself and what it's going to be prepared to commit itself to. So
But
it is about on the ground conflict as well, and a conflict that is being foreseen.
may I ask whether or not Taiwan has any blame for this? Are they have they said anything provocative or as if belligerent? Yeah, that's all I want to know.
Which country?
Taiwan certainly isn't wanting to encourage a conflict. Its position has shifted in recent years from no longer claiming, making the Republic of China claims that it's the government of all China. It's moving more towards wanting to be independent, which isn't acceptable to China. But it's not wanting to. It doesn't want a military conflict. It couldn't possibly win one. So it in a sense is wanting to assert its independence, and that but it doesn't have the capacity to do so in a way that's incredibly dangerous.
Right. Leaving aside I wouldn't expect them to make warlike statements, but if they are more strongly asserting their independence, this is the thing that inflames the reactions in China, right? China
can't possibly accept that, in terms of its own,
that's what I mean.
Its own political discourse. But it does keep saying that it wants a resolution, but not a military one. And basically, a resolution is nowhere close at hand. But it's also the case that apart from skirmishes and militarization, that situation has been manageable for a very long time. So I think that if it were just a question of China and Taiwan, they could manage to work this out, as they have been working it out in various ways for a very long period of time. The problem is that it gets tied into these larger tensions.
Okay, but now
let me add a few points here, Amanda, answer your question.
Yeah.
Taiwan, since the Kuomintang was pushed out of power by popular vote, the Taiwanese have been kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, seeing how far, what they can get away with, and what they can do without China getting too upset. And there were some statements recently which were new formulations, which the Chinese reacted negatively to. There was the idea of establishing something in Washington under the name Taiwan. That also got a negative reaction from China. So they try things and then they pull back. They would like to have normal state-to-state relations with all the countries in the world. Because of the One China policy, because the UN recognizes the People's Republic of China as the only China, they do not have that with the vast majority of countries in the world. But they do have trade offices. And I know from having a wife who's an ambassador, that a huge part of the work of an ambassador has to do with trade and investment bilaterally. And so they get 90% of what you need out of those trade offices. And look at Taiwan. It's doing great. It has a strong economy. It's one of the wealthier countries in the world. So they do not have a fundamental interest in rocking the boat. They do not want to go the route of Hong Kong, but Hong Kong was another story. Hong Kong was always Chinese territory. It was just being rented by the British. So this arrangement, which Ellen has described accurately, is workable. The question is whether in 100 years, China might lose patience with the situation. But so far they haven't, and there are good reasons for it. One reason that's been highlighted by economists is that Taiwan produces 95% or more of the most advanced computer chips in the world. They're generations ahead in computer technology of every other country in the world. The US is happy to be 10 or 15 years behind China in its chip production. Chip production is not something where you can walk into a factory and point a gun at a person and say, make a chip. It's a huge operation. Taiwan has the whole thing going, has the trained people, and China, mainland China, would be absolutely stupid to disrupt that because they are as dependent as any country in the world on the Taiwan integrated circuits. So again, I think there are forces trying to turn this into a conflict. And it is not inherently something that needs to be conflictual.
Okay.
In fact, there's been very close economic relations between Taiwan and mainland China for decades. They've worked it out on the ground on a trade and an economic basis that's been, I think, mutually beneficial. So there's a reason for thinking that they can manage to do this.
Good. Okay. Well, this part of the conversation is ending on what seems to me an upbeat note. This thing is solvable. So I'm glad to hear it. Now, if I want to give Aaron a little extra time, because I think you missed a conversation, another talk show, where I had a conversation with Tariq Ralph, and it would be lovely if you can fill us in on the things that disappointed you that didn't get said in that conversation about no first use. So let me give you a few minutes to make your interventions about whatever you would have said if you'd been here.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a preface, I'll mention that I am one of about a dozen people who have founded an international campaign called No First Use Global. And we got going this summer. We circulated an open letter to Biden and Putin in the lead up to their Geneva summit, where we asked them to reiterate the Reagan-Gorbachev statement and to make a bold move towards no first use in their mutual relations and globally. That letter was signed by 1,200 people worldwide. about 700 Americans, no, sorry, 500 Americans and 300 Europeans, including William Perry, other top US military and government former officials. It was signed by foreign ministers and defense minister, former in Europe and also in Japan. That was a great way for us to get off the campaign even before we had formally launched it. There will be a webinar that'll be partly about the campaign on Friday, and it will launch a new open letter in relationship to the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference, which starts in January. These review conferences are held every 5 years. They're preceded by preparatory committee meetings. And this open letter calls for basically two things. One, that the 5 nuclear weapon states that are parties to that treaty should adopt no first use policies, and they should end any acquisition of nuclear weapons. Thirdly, that they should start a process for the elimination of nuclear weapons and the establishment of a nuclear weapon-free world. And fourthly, they should divert the monies that have been going into nuclear weapons towards all the good things that need to be done. So we're hoping that that letter, given more than 10 days, which is all that we were allowed for the summit letter, that this letter circulating for perhaps a month or two will gather thousands and thousands of signatures of activists around the world. You've been sent the letter, perhaps Meta can, when it's finalized, there's still some drafting going on, but when it's finalized, Meta can provide a link to it on the YouTube page.
Can you quickly get it onto some website and give me the link to that website? Because at the end of this show, which I will edit it this afternoon, I will put up the link as something people can see. So get it to me real quick, okay?
I can't do it that quickly. I'm sorry. It'll have to be in a note on the YouTube below. Maybe you can tell readers to come back.
All right, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll post it on the comments column of this show and then give that link so that people can go there and read it. Okay.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, great.
Okay. Now, in terms of Tariq's comment, that was a preface. In terms of Tariq's comment, the thing that I found was fraught with confusion was it centers around the term extended deterrence. There are two dimensions to extended deterrence. One you could call the geographic dimension, that whoever has the deterrent is providing it for another country, for a wider territory than just their own. So that's the geographic extension. But the second extension, which for historical reason has been paired with the first, is that we not only will deter nuclear war, we will also try to deter conventional war with our threats of nuclear weapon use. And so they don't have to be united. It so happens when NATO was formed, the US already had a first use policy, and willy-nilly that became the policy that NATO adopted and has adopted ever since, although there has been dissent about it from time to time. And we're hoping to provoke a lot of dissent about it in the coming years. Mm-hmm. You can separate those two. You can have a deterrent that does not involve first use, And you can extend it geographically to other countries, saying, we will use nuclear weapons if you are attacked by nuclear weapons, but only if you are attacked by nuclear weapons. Okay? So that if you go back and look at the conversation you had, that distinction was being sloshed across back and forth many times. And I think it created a lack of clarity about what we're really demanding with no first use. For example, it was talked about whether you should leave NATO or not. Now, maybe with the TPNW, it's a debate about whether a country would need to leave NATO in order to sign the TPNW. But there is nothing inherently against a country saying, look, I don't want to be defended by the first use of nuclear weapons. Now, I'm fine with NATO being a nuclear alliance, but that aspect of it, the first use aspect of it, I reject, and I will not be party to. That would, of course, cause a debate within NATO, but I actually think it's a debate that could be won. Not only because NATO is so much stronger than Russia now, which was not the case when NATO was first formed and through a lot of the Cold War, but simply because of the heightened humanitarian consciousness that has been developed partly through the campaign for the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. Then there was a second point where I think there was confusion, and where I would disagree with Tariq, which is, while it's fine to emphasize the reduction of nuclear weapons, we have to recognize that the first use policies represent a serious obstacle to significant further reductions. These weapons have been acquired in order to back up a no first use threat. So if they want to continue to have that threat, they need to retain those weapons.
A first
country,
in order to back up a first use threat.
yes, exactly. The first
You
use
said a
threat.
no first use.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
It's late here. I'm going to garble some things. Thank you for
Okay.
correcting.
I just
Thank
want to
you for
get us
correcting.
clear.
No, to back up the first use threat.
Yeah.
If you think about it, a country that's relying on nuclear weapons to deal with conventional threats is not ready to live in a nuclear weapon-free world. Even if everyone else got rid of their weapons, their nuclear weapons, they would still feel threatened by the conventional weapons and still say, oh, we need our weapons to counter those threats. Mm-hmm. So the challenge of going to no first use is challenging countries to deal with the convention, come up with ways of dealing with the conventional threats that does not involve nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. That's why in the open letter, we don't expect them to adopt no first use overnight. I think it would be good if they did, and I think they'd be surprised how well everything would work out anyway. But there's an institutional reluctance to make a switch quickly. So in the open letter, we talk about reaching that objective before the 11th NPT review conference, in other words, in 5 years, mm-hmm. and to come to the first preparatory meeting in 2 years with a worked out plan about how they're going to make the transition. We're trying to be reasonable.
Sounds good to me. Now we're running out of time.
There is another alternative that I'd like to get on the table about dealing with NATO, intermediate, that to the one that Aaron mentioned. I'll take it very quickly. I've been suggesting for years the NATO Charter, Article 12, allows any country to convene a meeting to talk about what's going on in the alliance. I have suggested for a long time that Canada convene such a meeting and raise not a whole range from first use to the Third Man Treaty, and say initially that if there are not serious discussion and changes, Canada will reevaluate its position in NATO. I think that's a workable first step, possibly in addition to what Aaron has suggested. But I'm fascinated by the approach he has of the nations that say, no, don't bother to protect me. I hadn't thought of that, but I wanted to get my idea on the table. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
you're talking about a mechanism there, and any approach that tries to get practical results needs mechanisms. And the NPT review conference is a mechanism. And what you've described is, for NATO, could be a very important mechanism.
Bless you. Now, Alan, you have the last word, and a very short word.
Well, I certainly think that the efforts to move back from any kind of nuclear modernization are very important, and I support the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. I'm probably at this moment somewhat more concerned about the larger picture of increased militarization. And looking at Canada's situation, we probably don't want to be going out and very seriously buying fighter jets and warships. So there's a great deal of war being waged now by conventional weapons that is actually going on. And so that is something to keep in mind, and not entirely to focus on nuclear disarmament. So I suppose this is an expansion beyond not only the no first use of nuclear weapons, but no first use of other very serious armaments as well.
No first use of anything. All right.
Yes.
Well, very good. I second the motion. It's been a lovely, interesting conversation, and I thank you all. Okay.